Welcome to the Killer Innovation Show, the longest continuously produced podcast in history. Each week, Phil McKinney brings you the insights and strategies to amplify your creativity and innovation skills. Here's your host, Phil McKinney.
What does it take to have a successful innovation career? It varies by individual. Now, many of you have been sending me notes asking how I did it, but rather than me talking about myself, I want to bring guests onto the show and have them share with you how they achieve success using innovation. And that's what we're going to do today. So today's guest is a software engineer who over a many-decade career transitioned into becoming the CEO. Key to that was a failure on a project that he was involved in, convincing the CEO to give that team a try to then launch an entirely new product that has repositioned the company and repositioned this individual to become the CEO. Now, throughout that process, though, he talks about the innovation and what did it take, and the fact that it was a 10-year investment by the CEO before him that believed in him, funded it, that established his career success. And at the end, I asked for that career advice. What advice would he give to the next generation of innovators? And stick to the end, because he gives some very surprising advice, particularly given today's world. So you're not going to skip out early. You're not going to miss this. Stick to the end. And so let's get started and let's jump in to this week's episode. Welcome to another episode of Killer Innovations. We are actually back in the studio in Colorado. Many of you know we've been most recently on the road in the mobile studio, but it's actually nice to be back. No, the studio is not done yet. It's still in the process of under construction, but it is starting to come back together. Today, we actually have a special guest. This is actually almost a makeup interview. We were supposed to actually connect in the bus in Atlanta at Tech Expo. However, a little thing called a hurricane kind of got in the way and caused everybody to change their travel schedule. So Nimrod, first off, thanks for being the flexibility to actually get this rescheduled, because I've been looking forward to having this conversation with you.
Thank you very much, Phil, and thanks for having me.
So Nimrod, give us a little bit of background on who you are and kind of your career path, your career story. I think it's pretty fascinating because you've been at Harmonic for quite some time on a pretty steady trajectory. But let's give the listeners a little bit of background on yourself.
Yeah, quite some time is very long. I started with Harmonic way back in '96 as a software developer. At the time, Harmonic was very focused on fiber optics for the broadband market. And at that time, they started to get into the digital video space. And I started to work on a conditional access solution that we developed. Long story short, I worked for about 3 years in software development and then moved into customer-facing solution role, where I engage with customers to look into kind of what problems they have that we can find a solution for. In early 2000, we were the first to identify the need for a QAM, edge QAMs, kind of, we coined the term edge QAM for the VOD architecture that started to emerge at the time. We worked with the Sea Change and N-Cube at the time, and really the first innovation that we brought to the market was how to deliver video, MPEG video over IP networks into an edge QAM. Did that for a couple of years. I'll get back to that. We were leading the market, which at some point, kind of that market disappeared with the migration to IP. We'll remember that. We'll come back to that. But I think over the years, we've done a couple of other things that are related to the transition of the cable industry, from analog to digital video, ad insertion, digital ad insertion, the whole SCTE 35. We got the Emmy Award for that back then moving to high definition. So multiple cycles in which we really helped the industry to move forward. I think the more kind of recent, interesting story at the tail end of the let's call it the EdgeQuam days, and we were leading the market. It was clear that video on demand and later on video is all going to go IP, meaning it's going to go over the CMTS, and that part of the spectrum will get expanded and expanded. And we thought, hey, what are we going to do here? And we decided to get into that market and try to do what everybody else did at the time. It was the converged platform, the so-called CCAP. And we spent quite some time trying to build a chassis with everything that is required to do that. And I will admit, we failed. We just couldn't get it off the ground. This was around the time that DOCSIS 3.0. We designed something that would address the DOCSIS 3.0, and then 3.1 came along, and we said, we're just going to be there too little, too late. What are we going to do? This was about 2015 or so, and a bunch of our engineers basically said, hey, this idea of network function virtualization, which was very early days, where you can take implementation of a networking stack and virtualize it, run it in software. So instead of running on FPGAs and ASIC hardware, custom hardware, do it all in software. And man, I've got pictures of how the first proof of concept looked like. It was a Frankenstein. Our team actually went to Fry's. Those of you from the Silicon Valley know the Fry's electronic store, to kind of put together a server. And I think the rest is history. And obviously, I think getting the right implementation and keep up with the software architecture, do it cloud native and expand. And because I will admit, early on, it did not meet the kind of the scale and performance that the industry would expect. We simply knew that over time, Intel will come up with new generation of those CPUs and network interface cards. And, long story short, we got to, 64 CPU cores and 100 gig NICs, 200 gig, 400 gig. So the economy really worked well for us. But I think that's kind of the background of my journey. I started as a software developer, more of customer facing, and more recently, about 5 months ago, I became the CEO of Harmonic.
So that whole path is pretty interesting, because we've seen it not just in the industry of cable broadband, but we've seen it across other industries, right? Where the proprietary hardware nature of a lot of industries, in order to support tight vertical integration, you got Moore's law and just that scale that Intel, AMD, NVIDIA, all the chip guys are just doing, that just kind of choose that proprietary hardware to get to this more generic hardware where software can really take over. So I guess would you classify yourself then as kind of the traditional software eats hardware for lunch type of a model, where?
Not everything. I think I truly believe in what can be softwareized should be softwareized, assuming you do it right and you take advantage of the right architecture. When it comes to RF and modulation, you can actually do a lot in software and just keep kind of the analog to digital to analog. But it's finding the right kind of partitioning between what makes sense to be hardware versus software. I think for a lot of networking functions, it makes total sense to do that in software.
No, and I actually agree. You kind of got these purists that say do everything in software. My background's a software engineer, and everybody, push everything to software. But you got to be smart about where that selection. But let's back up in your story. You were talking about, or you hinted at this experience of failure, and then pivoting to success. And as you and I were talking before we started the recording today, innovation's about failure, right? You've got to be willing to push the envelope. You've got to be willing to experiment. You got to be willing to try things, and you can't be afraid. And failure is not a negative. Failure is education. So talk a little bit about, you kind of hinted at it a little bit, but I know there's something in there, and I want to dig in on that a little bit. So talk a little bit about that. What experiences that you've had on that failure to success kind of curve?
It's not an easy one, and you kind of get to the point where it's not going well. The decision is not overnight, and
Right.
you've got a big team focusing on that. And on the one hand, you need to rally the troops and motivate people. And on the other hand, you look at the timeline, you look at the competition, you look at customers, and you see that this is not getting to where you want. I think it's also a moment that you have to kind of take and get the right people in the room and say, guys, this is not working. And I think at that point in time was kind of the team around me. And by the way, I want to highlight that this whole entrance into the space of CMTS and software virtualization was organic. We did not make any acquisition. So it was a team that had a passion to make something together. We failed. Okay. Before we wrap everything kind of down and give the keys back, is there anything we can do to make a difference? And obviously, you need like industry dynamics that will work in your favor. And it was that early days of virtualization or the network function virtualization. So very small team said, "Hey, we can try that." And by the way, we had other.
How big was that team?
We were 5, 6. It was very small core team.
That's a small team.
That's a small team who said we can do that, and if we take this along with that, and we take and by the way, there are many assets of the failed journey that you can actually bring along. And now you go for a different architecture, and it's a great success. So we did not start from scratch. We just totally changed the architecture. I will admit that at that time, Broadcom started to talk about their remote PHY silicon. So it was not just virtualization. It was also the fact that cable is seeing the benefit of going to a distributed architecture, which obviously is key foundation for going DOCSIS 4.0 and all of that. So it was more than that, but it was a key enabling kind of capability. And then we really focused on some POC and all of that. And I even have the diagram of how I went to my boss at the time, the CEO, to kind of, because I need to convince him that, okay, not only we failed and we need to shut down, but I need his trust and faith in yet another direction. Wasn't easy, but I think in retrospect, we did the right thing. I think it was not enough. We also had to take that on the road and convince customers that this is going somewhere. And I will admit that whether we were lucky or that was part of the strategy, we had at the time Comcast and Tony Werner that really believed in that story of software and virtualization, and they were an early partner.
Yeah, and I was going to ask you that question because I know that that Tony and Alad and the team at Comcast, very big believers in this whole shift to this virtualization. How important? Give me the timing. You've got this idea. You've had this attempt that didn't work out. You now are pitching the CEO. Did you already have the relationship with Comcast at that point around virtualization, or was it convince the CEO, then go to Comcast? I'm trying to understand what the steps were, because it's
Yeah, so,
insightful to the listeners when they're thinking about their own pivots.
yeah,
What
yeah.
right steps?
It was convincing the CEO and getting the, let's call it, conditional go ahead, but it's conditional. It's like with a venture capital. Show me who else. Bring another venture capital, and I will invest. So I think it was. I mean, he liked the story. He kind of got the vision, but then in parallel to putting the POC together, we went forward with this discussion with Comcast at the time. But we knew that we had to bring something. We cannot just bring vaporware, slideware. We needed to bring a lab POC, and I think that made a big difference. I mean, this is kind of I know nowadays we read about like venture capital investment in companies that have just an idea, but I truly believe in showing something that kind of trigger the imagination of what the team is capable, and more than a presentation. So anyway, that was the sequence of events that was leading for that major pivot that we did.
Yeah, and again, I mean, at Cable Labs, we're big on POCs just to prove something out, because we don't build products, we don't sell services. We work with companies like yours and others to kind of try to think about what the future of the industry is going to go. And I'm with you, right? I'm not a big fan of the venture capital model of people coming in with a PowerPoint and asking for their first, A round at 5 million with a 50 million valuation. It's like, okay, I don't think so. It's because translating it is hard. So in your case, it was you had the challenge, you decided to pivot, you came up with this idea, you got conditional okay from the CEO, but really to get full support, you needed to bring some form of kind of an endorsement from the idea. And in that case, it was bringing a customer in as part of really the partnership to take this and really bring it forward.
Yeah, that's right. We really needed the customer positive indication that what we do is not just interesting, but something that they would collaborate with us and will eventually deploy. And it was a long journey. And I'm thankful for the trust that we got from Harmonic's management. This is not an easy industry. For a while there was a view that we are being used just to help the industry get better pricing from the incumbents. This was radical, different idea. We were challenged by the incumbents, and I think.
So you're talking about incumbents in the traditional rack.
Yeah. We had established competitors that were leading the market. Again, we came from nowhere. What was working in our favor is that it was different. So we would always get a meeting. I think all operators were intrigued and interested to kind of get the story and how exactly this is working. And even many would say, hey, bring it to the lab, because we heard that it's not going to scale and it's not going to get the performance, etc. So it was a long journey to get to where we are today. Today we lead the market definitely for the virtualization and distributed, but the total category of broadband access for cable, we're number one today. And I think that's mainly thanks to the fact that we kind of pioneer that new architecture. I think we also executed, and we knew how to focus along the way, really focus on customers, go through the process of MVP and take advantage of the software architecture and the agility and the ability to move fast and kind of going with that cloud native architecture that really allows you to innovate and make a lot of software changes without kind of taking down the service. So I think the technology was also helping us to make the right progress. After all, and we talk a lot about the importance and how critical reliability of broadband service is. So do all of that while not sacrificing reliability and in fact, achieve better reliability. Again, the architecture, it's not monolithic and it has its own benefits and advantages to achieve that better reliability for the network. So, in retrospect, we did well, but as you can hear, it was not an easy journey. The failure, the pivot, getting kind of customer convinced, dealing with the criticism of the industry, like it's not going to work, it's not going to scale. But long story short, I think we're in a totally different discussion today, where the industry is DOCSIS 4.0, unified. 10 gig is just a milestone. Now we talk about 25 gig. So we're happy and satisfied with the kind of the journey we've gone through.
So what was the total length of time? Because one of the things we talk a lot about here on the show is the need for management leaders to have patience, right? Everybody wants the quick hit. They want something out in a quarter, or half a year, or impact the share price right away because you got Wall Street, breathing down your neck. What was that length of time from the time you developed that initial idea until you could actually go back to the CEO and say, see, we did it, we've delivered, whether you think that's first revenue or first customer contract? What was that length of time?
We started in 2014. The pivot was 2014. And I think we were running, I would say, conditional for almost a year until we got Comcast, and we got other early customers, Comhem, Tele2. We had a few others that were kind of early customers, but it's not enough. I mean, everybody will know that this is not enough. You need more than that.
Yep.
Obviously, the Comcast endorsement and collaboration was a major one, and that started in 2016. But I would say that even then it was okay. We're gonna team up together and work on this. But deployments only started in 2018, and it really started to ramp up in the early days of COVID. So in retrospect, COVID was a blessing for us, kind of the timing of that. And we're, 2024. So it's been a 10-year journey with almost 2 years to kind of get into the market and another 4 years to develop yourself. And the last 4 years were more of expansion.
So there are not many leadership teams that will make long bets like that. Why do you think Harmonic, or why do you think any company? I mean, Tony Warner at Comcast and I have this conversation. We had this conversation, a long time ago, and he was actually the guy who brought me into the industry. When I retired from out of HP, he talked me into coming to Cable Labs. But I look at what Comcast did on the X1 investment. That was 14, 15 years of Brian Roberts continuing to fund that. Now you got Harmonic, 10 years. There aren't many companies that are willing to go and fund an innovation effort to that kind of duration. Why did Harmonic do it? And two, is there a characteristic to organizations you think? And what advice would you give leaders about making these long bets?
It's interesting. I remember in my early days in the industry, I always looked at Scientific Atlanta and GI Corolla at the time, and they were kind of, I would call it secured businesses. They had this constant revenue coming from their primarily the video, the conditional access business, which was like somewhat proprietary. Once you get into the system, you have no other choice. You have to buy their set-top boxes, their conditional access. And Harmonic was always what I define like an insecure company. We always had to be unique and better to get the mind share. We were somewhat outsider, kind of from the inner circle of the industry. So it was very clear that we had to be better, ahead, unique to really succeed. So I think that's something very, very unique to who we are and kind of our culture and DNA. I think in this specific case, we had the conviction that the industry will need that, and it has unique benefits. Not today, not tomorrow, but if you look over time. And it's not just the distributed or the software architecture for reliability or velocity of updating the architecture, the space, saving power. I mean, there's a whole page of arguments why. So that's an internal conviction. But I think it was for my management, for our CEO at the time, Patrick, to basically listen to, or actually looking at the body language of our customers when we kind of give an update on the product, the milestones we go through, the progress that we make. And at the end, he kind of did his own judgment based on how motivated the team is, and the team was super motivated. The feedback and the kind of the body language from the customers, and there is no reward without a risk. And at the end, you kind of, hey, is this a lifestyle job, or I want to do something that will make a difference here? Yes, there is a risk. But you know what? We used to be, if you go back to the Harmonic story, we started as a pure HFC analog optics. Over time, we moved into the digital video. We made a couple of acquisitions. We were big in that space. And by the way, that industry have changed, the move to the cloud and streaming and all of that. So you cannot just stick to one product line forever and a day. You have to reinvent yourself. And, you look back in time, if we wouldn't do it back then, I don't know what would be Harmonic today. So yeah, you have to make those decisions, but sometimes not doing is worse than taking kind of a risk for extended investment because you know that you're going to die sooner. So anyway, that's kind of the story.
Yeah, I think your point right there at the end about standing still just makes you an easy target, right? You got to pivot, you got to change, you got to move into new areas. The market changes, your customers change, end users change. What do they use as a buying criteria? And we're seeing this in broadband around the world today. Let's talk a little bit about the future here as we're getting, winding down. What's your thoughts on kind of the future generations, right? Now you're CEO, I'm a CEO, right? You're out there trying to recruit. If you were to give advice to that next generation that's coming into the job market and they want to make an impact, what are the things they should be thinking about? What are the skills they should be focusing on? What should they do coming into an organization to one, have an impact, but also have a meaningful long-term career And it's not unique to our industry, but I mean, just putting your CEO hat on,
Yeah.
what advice would you give to that young next generation, people who are keenly interested in the innovation tech world? What advice would you give them?
So number one, go to the office. Don't get excited by I can work remotely. Go to the office, even if it's possible to work remote. So many skills you will develop by going to the office. Not just professional skills, but social skills that are super important to develop yourself. So that's kind of number one. I think that this never-ending curiosity and passion to learn is super important. The same way that we kind of talked about how standing still is not an option. I would say the same thing for any individual, any younger engineer that gets into the market today with a specific skill or whatever first job. This could evolve very quickly, and the best way to kind of make you relevant for extended period of time and enjoy opportunities is to keep up with, it used to be like programming languages. Yeah, I agree and admit that today with all the kind of Gen AI coding and all of that, the exact language is less important. But you know what? Prompt the right problem in kind of generic problem-solving language and get the code, but develop yourself and always read, be really maniacal about learning new things and kind of let your curiosity drive you. It doesn't matter which direction you go, if it's hardware, software, if it's in the broadband space or networking or healthcare or cybersecurity, it doesn't matter. Just no space is standing still. You have, and status quo is not an option anywhere. So that would be my number one advice.
So let me ask you a question then before we wrap up, because now you've piqued the curiosity. What role do you think you had in your career? Because you started off as a software engineer and then you moved over to customer facing and you changed and there's people who like to stay in a purely technical role, but you actually moved around and had a lot of different perspectives that you kind of built up over time, albeit within Harmonic. You've been there
Yeah.
for some time. What role do you think that played? And should younger people be open to taking those risks? Because it is risky when you step into, you're trained as a software engineer and now maybe you're a sales support person in the field or whatever. So what role do you think that had in your success?
I think what was driving me is creating or solving a real problem for the customer.
Right.
Whatever I did was never just a cool technology by itself. I very much enjoy the end result to see the benefit and value that the end customer is getting out of the creation of whatever we did. Now, when you look at that, I think that kind of the early days of hands-on software, and I did a lot of embedded, and then the more customer-facing to understand the broadband and the cable space. I kind of understand the ecosystem really well. And then understanding the commercial of that, like what's the value of that, for how much it can be sold, what enterprise can we develop based on that idea. The combination of all of that together, I think, is really unique because I can always understand any part of the equation. When the team is telling me that this will take too long, I know how to challenge or how to contribute or enable that. The discussion with the customer, kind of the right questions to ask, and then putting the right business model. I don't think this is for everybody, but I think whoever is interested to go that path, I think kind of developing over the years the technical capabilities, the customer facing, and then the commercial. I certainly still enjoying that every day. So I think that was kind of the key enabling for me.
Yeah, that's a great wrap up. So hey, Nimrod, I thank you a lot again. Thank you for working the schedule so we could actually get this interview in. I greatly appreciate it. We will have links in the show notes. So if you want to follow Nimrod on LinkedIn, you'll be able to click on the link and find and just keep track of what he and Harmonic are doing. They are real thought leaders, and I would definitely encourage you to follow and just see what they're up to. You may be in a completely different industry, but it's also a great opportunity to cross-pollinate. And again, Nimrod, thanks a lot for joining us today.
Thank you very much, Phil. Thanks for having me.
Podcasting nonstop since 2005, this has been the Killer Innovation Show on the Innovators Network.